wrong. And I said, well, why don't you answer? He said, I'm a boy. Boys don't do that. And for him, it was more important to belong to the other, and the way of belonging was not to ask questions. And I think that, like, the others were standing and not engaging. We were trying to belong very much, but we were just looking as passive people. And I think that also it makes me think of law as anonymous. It's important for laws not to say, like, Michael, you have to go to bed at 7, but, like, children should go to bed, or people should just walk and not bump into each other, but not Isabel, you should not bump into bed. There's a treasure there for people to keep on belonging when law is not normal.
It's something I think like interpretation, because, for example, I didn't really realize you want to codify this kind of action, because for me something natural. And you push, I think, directly and indirectly to give some, justification as a law. Even I've never thought shaking a hand is law, was something for me, something like, friendship, or something I want to show, I accept you, I understand you. But you push me to find some justification, even it wasn't really in my mind. Something now is for me imagination after that, because my reaction is here, and after that you push me to create something as a law. That is my imagination. It's not really my nature.
That's a good one. And when I was talking to Jillian Calder about this exercise, she was drawing parallels with other things outside of the handshake, and we can draw some parallels with, or we can draw on Rod's text too, in thinking about this. Rod Macdonald, 2%. And the example she gave me was, how did you sit on the bus this morning? And like that, to me, is fascinating in terms of the study of law and norms. What subjectivity am I embodying? Were my legs crossed? Did I take up a lot of space? Did I talk to the person next to me? In what language? So I think that it. Sorry.
No, because sometimes this kind of thing is after that, it's not naturality. No, it's obligation because it's rule. That's it's challenge. No, it's not myself, but it's obligation because it's rule. But I think it's sometimes when we explain ourselves as in the frame of law. Now for me it's obligation because you asked me. If not for me, something is by my nature.
I think it's funny the law of how people comment on other people as well. I found myself, it was funny with Mary's handshake, because the first thing I thought, I was like, oh, she's looking quite dominant, and then I was like, well, that offends. So I actually censored myself a little bit, because I was like, maybe I shouldn't say that, because that seems, and yet I probably totally could have. And then when I think Vicky or someone let that, it's a little bit more of a value judgment of what was going on happen, then everyone was like, yeah, she's dominant. And so it's interesting.
Yeah. And the normativity of politeness or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's me being courteous and not knowing what I'm is that, or not wanting to offend or seem like it was a rude thing to do. I'm very polite.
Maybe just a couple little points, because this is about pedagogy. One of the things that I found helpful and useful with this exercise is that it's a really great entry point to getting students to question or challenge dominant conventions and protocols for teaching and learning, just generally. Just right away, this is a kind of a jarring exercise to begin a class with in some ways, especially, again, I know we're not all law students here, but and that there are conventions and protocols in all disciplines, but law seems to be particularly thick with them. It introduces and allows students to engage with embodied and empathetic pedagogies, and to privilege other modes of meaning-making and knowledge construction beyond the text. So again, riffing off Rod's article. And it's also a very collaborative and active learning process, which tends to just be more inclusive, because this again is in the context of teaching to transgress and the theater of the oppressed, and so these tend to be more inclusive modes of learning. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree? Would you like to add? Do you think it's ridiculous? Is it just something fun to do instead of rigorous academic, something
I think it's great fun, but if you need to have one skeptical person and that person sort of voices that, you could have like all the students kind of losing out on it and saying that, oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, it just depends. If you get everybody on board from the beginning and it's happening, it could be a very good exercise.
I think one of the problems with thinking about it as potentially a way to transgress norms is that what we saw over and over again was those norms just being repeated. So if you don't have the sufficient time and thought to go through and actually unpack how those norms are being reiterated over and over again in so many ways, then I think what you do is you reinscribe them in a way that makes them seem transgressive when they actually aren't. And I think that that's something that we do a lot in pedagogy in particular. And so I think there's a way in which things that we bill as transgressive are often things that work to reinforce those norms in really dangerous ways. So I would be cautious about using something without having the time and the resource to fully and completely kind of unpack all of the ways in which the interactions were normative, rather than just recognizing that we all ended up walking pretty much in the same circle and doing the same behaviors. But there was other ways we would be very normative and rigid as well.
Do you want to mention some of those?
I don't know. Well, some of them have been mentioned, right? Some of them have been mentioned in different ways, but there was others. So somebody just mentioned something about that hit a nerve, but just the cultural way that we understand different sorts of things. We can look in this room and say there's people from different cultures, but actually we're still imposing a fairly similar cultural understanding, so that shaking hands is a normal way of interacting with people. It's only a normal way of interacting with people within particular cultures, and it's not a normal way of interacting with other people. So that's reinscribing a norm that we're not recognizing as only a norm within our culture, so that it would be impolite, for example, for a man to extend his hand to a woman in a handshake in certain countries, or for anyone to extend their hand to handshake in other countries.
But I think that those are interpretations that we want to actually draw out. And
yes.
So I think, yeah, that was good.
No, I would agree they are, right? But I'm just saying that things that we hadn't really discussed, and so you're reinscribing the normativity of a handshake as a normal way of interacting.
Just to answer what Elaine has to say, it's normal in certain circumstances. It's certainly not normal in a seminar situation, that people would stand up and walk around or stand up and shake hands. So there's a certain normality that you expect, and I'm not sure whether Suzanne would think this is appropriate for me to say this, but you may have noticed that she already kind of picked on people to start, right? And that the whole idea of the awkwardness and how it might not have worked, in fact, if she hadn't picked on me and Karen to start with, because she kind of knew that we were on side. So that's transgressive in some ways, but it also shows that you do have to be sensitive to your audience, and you can't go in completely blind, because that might be more transgressive to do that. But on the other hand, we also have a responsibility as teachers to go with the flow, but also be ready to start the ball rolling in certain ways.
Does anyone?
Can I just?
Can I just see if anyone else has a comment? Does anybody else want to add anything?
Okay, I just wanted to say the other thing is that I think that often what happens is we think of transgressive as being good, and so it's moral imperative to always transgress, and then we code normativity as bad. And I think that those are judgments that, where in lots of instances I would agree with them, there are also things that in itself is difficult and problematic, to just sort of assume that if something's transgressive, it's good, and if it's normative, it's bad.
I think that's an interesting figure from that, but I don't think that that's the purpose of the exercise. It's certainly not like, again, it's really, one is incredibly unfortunate that it didn't call her couldn't be here to bring it one step further, which is actually getting to the theater of the press. So, and maybe what